Right, so today we begin from line 396, Pope's an essay on criticism. Pope is here talking about the different defects of the critics. Uh, some critics judge a work of poetry only from a particular perspective, neglecting the other aspects. So Pope is enumerating these particular focuses of the poets. So on line 396 he says, "Some the French writers, some our own despise, the ancients only or the moderns prize." Some critics despise means hate the French writers. Others hate our own poets, English writers. Some prize, that is considered valuable, only the ancients, others only the moderns. So critics are divided according to their whims. Thus, wit like faith by each man is applied to one small sect and all are damned beside. So as religion was divided into many sects, similarly here wit or intellectual reference is divided into small sects where the critics prize only a particular kind of poetry. To one small sect and all are damned beside. Mainly they seek the blessing to confine and force that sun but on a path to shine, which not alone the southern wit sublimes, but ripen spirits in cold northern climes. So as the sun shines on the entire world, but they want the blessing to be confined to a particular path, force the sun to shine on a particular path, even though the sun does not appear only in the southern hemisphere or in the northern climate, but ripen spirits in cold northern climes. So southern wit, actually the poet is talking about, Pope is talking about poetry which develops not only in one region but in all regions. But critics won't look uniformly at poets from everywhere, which from the first has shone on ages past, enlights the present and shall warm the last. So the sun has always been there, shining on this world. It was there in the past, it is in the present, and it will be there in the future. Similarly, poetry or poetic talent would be there in the past, present and future, though each may feel increases and decays and see now clearer and now darker days. So every part of the globe feels the sun receding or decaying or days becoming shorter and darkening, but the sun continues to shine as before. Regard not then if it be old or new, but blame the false and value still the true. So this apprehension of the sun shining over our world is limited insofar as we can apprehend only the sun shining in our part of the world and not in the other parts. Therefore it is a false assessment that the sun is not shining. Similarly, in the case of poetry, critics make such false assessments, but the critic must blame the false and value the true, that talent may prosper anywhere, anytime. Some never advance a judgment of their own, but catch the spreading notion of the town. They reason and conclude by precedent and own stale nonsense which they never invent. So some critics always copy the judgment of other critics, or they just follow the trend of criticism of the time, and they do not have any judgment of their own. So they reason and conclude by precedent, that is whatever the other critics had said earlier, and therefore they do not have anything fresh to say. All that they have to say is stale and therefore nonsense, because they do not invent any criticism. Some judge of authors' names, not works, and then nor praise nor blame the writings but the men. Others only judge the men and not the writing. Of all the servile heart, the worst is he that in proud dullness joins with quality, a constant critic at the great man's board, to fetch and carry nonsense for my lord. There are critics who flatter some lords because their patrons would be some lords, and even though the lord could not write well, they would flatter such lords. So, servile heart, Pope calls them, that these critics are servile, and the worst is he who in proud dullness joins with quality. So, such a critic would join dullness with quality, and therefore his criticism would be dull. A constant critic at the great man's board, to fetch and carry nonsense for my lord. So board here means boarding or lodging, which means that a critic who is patronized by a great man or by a lord, he would be like a servant, and constant here means loyal. So this is not a virtue here. So he is a faithful servant, and like a servant fetches and carries trivial things for the lord. Similarly, he would write his criticism. What woeful stuff this madrigal would be if some starved hackney sonneteer or me. If this madrigal, this particular poem, was not written by the Lord but written by an ordinary sonneteer or by me, the critic won't praise it. But because it is written by the Lord, then he praises it. But let a Lord once own the happy lines, how the wit brightens, how the style refines, before his sacred name flies every fault, and each exalted stanza teems with thought. So the same poem, if it is written by a Lord, even though it is dull, it is praised for wit and style and everything, so all faults seem to vanish. The vulgar thus through imitation err, as oft the learned by being singular. So much they scorn the crowd that if the throng by chance go right, they purposely go wrong. So schismatics, the plain believers quit, and are but damned for having too much wit. The vulgar, that is the ordinary critics, they make mistakes by imitation of other critics, whereas the learned critics, they make mistakes of the opposite extreme, because they try to be singular, that is, they try to be unique in their judgment, and they scorn the crowd so much. They want to be appreciated as unique, so they hate the common judgment so much that if the crowd goes to the right or by chance do the right thing, they purposely go wrong. Just as schismatics, that is the sects, Puritan sects, the plain believers quit. So ordinary believers, they do not accept these schismatics. Similarly, these learned, so-called learned critics, they are like schismatics and are but damned for having too much wit. So just as the schismatic Puritan fathers, they are criticized for their subtlety, similarly the wits, the critics who are learned critics, they are damned for having too much wit. That is, they do not have any proportionate judgment. Some praise at morning what they blame at night, but always think the last opinion right. So these critics are unstable in their judgment and capricious. Uh, there is no accepted norm or standard in their judgment. So they are very whimsical. The muse by these is like a mistress used. This hour she is idolized, the next abused. So such critics would praise some poetry now at one moment, and the next moment he would find a lot of faults. So it is like treating a mistress like a prostitute, treating a muse like a prostitute or a mistress. So I am skipping just a few lines. 444. Faith, gospel, all seemed made to be disputed, and none had sense enough to be confuted. So there is this dispute among critics over poetry, but it is true that even in religion, everything is disputed, and Pope refers to philosophy, particularly scholastic philosophy, which was famous for disputations. Spotists and Thomists now in peace remain amidst their kindred cobwebs in Duck Lane. So Spotists, the followers of Saint Thomas, followers of Duns Scotus, the medieval English scholastic, and Thomists, followers of Saint Thomas Aquinas. So they would quarrel in their days, but now all their books are not read by anybody, so they can be found among cobwebs in Duck Lane. Duck Lane was a place near Smithfield where old books were sold. If faith itself has different dresses worn, what wonder modes in which should take their turn? Oft leaving what is natural and fit, the current folly proves the ready wit. So sometimes critical judgment also behaves like fashions or modes, as fashions keep changing and fashions are often artificial. Similarly in judgment also, leaving aside the natural thing, the current folly or the current fashion is accepted as ready wit. And authors think their reputation safe, which lives as long as fools are pleased to laugh. So the appreciation by fools is of no use, but as long as fools enjoy their works, poets also seem to be happy. Which means that these fools are the critics who appreciate these works. I come to line 460. Pride, malice, folly against bride and rose, in various shapes of parsons, critics, bows. So when Dryden was writing, who is now accepted as a great poet, when he was writing, he was a generation before Pope. When he was rising, then several critics rose against him because of their pride, malice and folly. And these were parsons, that is churchmen, critics, bows. Bows means fashionable gentlemen. But sense survived when merry jests were past, for rising merit will bow up at last. So because in Dryden's poetry there was merit, therefore it would ultimately come up to the surface like a bow, even if it is dipped into water, it will come up to the surface. So ultimately merit will be appreciated. So sense survived when merry jests were past, that is when criticism which was casual and wrong, which was like jest or joke, therefore nothing serious. When this criticism or this passion of criticizing became a thing of the past, then people could appreciate Dryden's quality. However, if he returns again, then all these false critics would also return. Mighty return and bless once more our eyes, new Blackmoors and new Milbournes must arise. Sir Richard Blackmore, and Reverend Luke Milbourne. They were critics of Dryden. So if Dryden comes back again, then Blackmore's and Milbourne's will also come back, which means that a poet would always have critics, even if he is a good poet. Nay, should great Homer lift his awful head, Zoilus again would start up from the dead. So no great poet has been spared false criticism. So even if Homer again came back to us, then Homer's critic Zoilus would also come back from the dead. Envy will merit as its shade pursue. So envy always pursues merit. So whenever there is a poet of great merit, there would always be a critic who is envious of him. But like a shadow proves the substance true. So the shadow only proves that there is substance in the body which casts this shadow. Therefore, these critics are like shadows, and they prove that these poets have substance. For envied wit, like sol eclipse makes known, the opposing body's grossness, not its own. So when there is solar eclipse, we can judge the thickness or the dimensions of the planet that covers it, whether it is the earth or the moon. So not that of the sun. So the opposing body will only judge its grossness. Therefore, when critics criticize a good poet or a great poet, then we only understand him to be gross. When first that sun too powerful beams displays, it draws up vapors which obscures its rays. But eclipse is not permanent, so as eclipse ends, then the sun begins to cast its rays once again, and all vapors are evaporated, which previously obscured the rays. But even those clouds at last adorn its way, reflect new glories and augment the day. Even if there are some clouds, they only adorn the beauty of the sun. The idea of this stanza is that there is that in no way true merit can be kept hidden or obscured for a long time, but its glory will be apparent very quickly. Be thou the first to merit to befriend, his praise is lost to stays till all commend. So often in this poem, the poet apostrophizes, that is, directly addresses the critic, telling him, be thou. So this is a rhetorical figure called apostrophe, when you are addressing an absent person. So one should be quick in praising the merit of somebody and recognizing somebody's talent. One who delays in praising, that praise is lost. Short is the date, alas, of modern rhymes, and tis but just to let them live the times. Unfortunately, the days of modern poets are very limited. A poet does not remain in renown for very long, unlike the ancient poets who are still famous. Modern poets lose their fame quickly. Therefore, as long as possible, we should give them recognition. It is but just to let them live betimes. No longer now that golden age appears, when patriarch wits survived 1,000 years. Now in the Bible we have mentions of the patriarchs who lived 1,000 years. So now the lifespan of men has been reduced. Similarly, patriarch wits, that is, among poets also, there are some, the classical, the ancient poets, they are like the patriarchs in the Bible who can survive 1,000 years. Their reputation is not tarnished. But now length of fame, our second life is lost, and bare 80 is all even that can boast. So just like the length of people, the lifespan of people has been reduced to about 80, that is 60 years. In the 18th century, people did not live long like today because of diseases, lack of medicines. So if somebody lived up to 60 years, that was enough. So Pope says that now that the lifespan of the people is very short, similarly, the length of fame, which is like our second life, that is also short and does not survive more than 60 years. Our sons their fathers' failing language see, and such as Chaucer is, shall Dryden be. And as an example, Pope says that we quickly learn to analyze the defects of our predecessors. And in the 18th century, people had forgotten how to read Chaucer, because Chaucer's Middle English, in that language many words have a final E. Now in Chaucer's time that final E was pronounced, and therefore the rhyme or the meter was intact. But later it was dropped, it was not pronounced again. So in the 18th century it appeared that Chaucer's meter was all wrong in his poetry. And Pope reflects this attitude that just as we can see how Chaucer was wrong in his meter, similarly one day people will discover how Dryden was wrong, or how his language failed. So he introduces a kind of relativity of fame, that is, with the passage of time, with the passage of age, a poet loses his fame. So when the faithful pencil has designed some bright idea of the master's mind, where a new world leaps out at his command and ready nature waits upon his hand, when the ripe colors soften and unite and sweetly melt into just shade and light, when mellowing years their full perfection give and each bold figure just begins to live, the treacherous colors the fair art betray and all the bright creation fades away. So just as a picture drawn by somebody is alive when it is fresh, but with time its color fades. Similarly, with poetry, the color begins to fade, or people forget how to appreciate the poet. Now they who reach Parnassus's lofty crown employ their pains to spurn some others down. And while self-love each jealous writer rules, contending wits become the sport of fools. So once somebody becomes famous as a poet or a critic, he tries to spurn others down. He tries to show other writers in bad light. So here Pope is talking about the defects of critics, how most critics are envious of others, and their self-love. And while self-love each jealous writer rules, contending wits become the sport of fools. So because every writer is proud of his writing and does not like the writing of others, so all the writers, they are fighting among themselves, contending wits, and therefore they are the sport of fools. So people enjoy the writers fighting among themselves. But still the worst with most regret comment, for each ill author is as bad a friend. To what base ends and by what abject ways are mortals urged to sacred last of praise. So an ill author is a bad friend. Are never so dire a thirst of glory boast, nor in the critic let the man be lost. Good nature and good sense must ever join, to err is human, to forgive divine. So these four lines are addressed to a critic. Pope tells a critic that a critic should not be so thirsty of glory and should not be proud or boastful, so that one loses the man in the critic, that is, so that the critic loses his humanity. So a good critic must also be a good man, and good nature and good sense should join. So good nature is the human quality of the critic, and good sense is his taste or judgment of poetry. But in a critic, along with good sense, there must also be good nature, and a critic should know that to err is human. Every man makes mistakes, but to forgive is divine. Therefore, a critic should not be hostile to a writer, but should be forgiving of his mistakes. And this sentence is a translation of Seneca's Latin, errare humanum est, that is, to err is human. But it has now become like a proverb in English. But if in noble minds some dregs remain, not yet purged of spleen and sore disdain, discharge that rage on more provoking crimes, not fear a dirt in these flagitious times, no pardon while obscenity should find, though wit and art conspire to move your mind. So, if in noble mind, that is, if in a writer, some dregs remain, that is, some faults still remain which should be purged. So, these faults, the source of it could be spleen or disdain, that is, a person who is very bitter is splenetic, and who disdain others, who hate others. Discharge that rage on more provoking crimes. So, the critic should not have these faults, these qualities, but if he is angry, if he is splenetic, if he is disdainful, then he should discharge that anger on more provoking crimes, but not on poets. So there is no doubt of such, crimes or great mistakes done by people in these flagitious times, that is when people are very quarrelsome. No pardon while obscenity should find, though wit and art conspire to move your mind. Sometimes poets very wittily would use obscenity in order to become popular, but a critic should not forgive such obscenity. But dullness with obscenity must prove as shameful, sure as importance in love. But if obscenity and dullness go together, then a poem does not have any quality. It is like as shameful as importance. In the fat age of pleasure, wealth and ease, sprung the rank weight and thrived with large increase. When people indulged in pleasure and people were wealthy, then all kinds of vices thrived in society. When love was all an easy monarch's care. Now here actually Pope is referring to the reign of Charles II and the court of Charles II, who became the King of England after Restoration. But even though Pope was a Roman Catholic, we see that he is criticizing the court of Charles II because there was too much of indulgence, moral laxity in the Restoration court. Seldom at council, never in a war. Guilds ruled the state and statesmen persisted. So the monarch, Charles II, he never called the parliament and he never participated in a war, which means that he did not have any kingly qualities. Guilds ruled the state, it is people who indulged in love intrigues and were jilted by their lovers, they ruled the state. And statesmen wrote farces. Nay, wits had pensions and young lords had wit. Wits had pensions means that really talented poets, they were retired, but young lords who did not have any talent, they were believed to have wit. The fair sat panting at a courtier's play, and not a mask went unimproved away. The fair refers to the fair sex, that is women. They sat panting, means eagerly watching the performance of plays in court, and not a mask went unimproved away. So the women at that time went to the theatre in masks. And here Pope is being satirical when he says that the quality of the ladies' minds were highly improved by watching such plays, which actually Pope is being ironical here. He means the opposite, that the quality of the plays was so bad that they did not have any improvement at all. The modest fan was lifted up no more, and Virgil smiled at what they blushed before. So women became more and more immodest in the court of Charles II. The fan was lifted, the fashion was to use a fan. The ladies lifted the fan to cover their face, but it was not lifted anymore. And where earlier women blushed, that is, they were very modest, now they smiled, which means that they became very immodest. Then after Charles II, Pope speaks about the reign of William III, who came from the Netherlands, if you remember the history. So he was a foreigner, he was a Dutchman. So we have a kind of historical account of the English court and the development of criticism and poetry. The following license of a foreign reign did all the dregs of bold Socinius train. Now, William III was a Protestant, and then the kind of poetry or the kind of culture that he favored, that led to a purge of most of these vices of the Restoration Court. Socinius was a Puritan theologian who equated religion with morality. Then unbelieving priests reformed the nation. So the Socinians, they denied the existence of the Trinity. So here again Pope is critical, even though here he is talking about a Protestant king. So under the Restoration culture of Charles II also the court was very corrupted. Under the rule of William III, the Protestant king, there was too much of Puritanism, which was also bad for poetry and theatre. And the priests reformed the nation, but they themselves did not believe in God or Trinity, and taught more pleasant methods of salvation. So salvation became a matter of pleasure. The Pope is being ironical here. For heaven's free subjects might their rights dispute, lest God himself should seem too absolute. So the idea of absolute monarchy, which was held by the Tudor and Stuart kings, that was replaced by the idea of the parliament and democratic discussions in the parliament and so on, disputation about rights of the free subjects. The Pope is using this political metaphor to suggest that in the field of culture also there was too much of democracy and rejection of absolutism. Pulpits their sacred satire learn to spare, and vice admire to find a flatterer there. So in the churches there was no longer use of satire from the pulpit, in the sermons of the priests, and somehow vice found a flatterer in the court of William III. Encouraged thus, which titans braved the skies, and the press groaned with licensed blasphemies. So an allusion to the struggle of the titans, the fight of the titans with the gods. The skies refer to the gods. So the titans braved the sky. and the press groaned, which means that the bad poets, like the Titans, fought with the angels, and therefore bad literature was being published. So the press groaned as licensed blasphemies were being published. These monsters, critics, with your darts engaged, here point your thunder and exhaust your rage. So these are the monsters when culture is corrupted by some kind of political license or political practice. And critics should engage their darts, that is, attack with their arrows, their sharp criticism, this kind of activity. Here point your thunder and exhaust your rage. Yet shun their fall to scandalously nice, will needs mistake an author into vice. So, do not be nice to authors who actually do not only make mistakes but indulge in vice. All seems infected that the infected spy, as all looks yellow to the jaundiced eye. Therefore, the point here is that the critic should not be infected with any of the infections, either public loss of morality or general corruption of the court and so on. Just like one who has jaundice would see everything yellow, similarly the infected would see everything to be infected. Therefore, a critic must avoid this kind of an infection. So, in these stanzas, Pope says what kind of infection or what kind of which qualities a critic should avoid and which qualities a critic should never allow, like obscenity, dullness, and so on, and where to focus all his criticism, all his anger, and where he should be forgiving. So after saying the qualities that a critic should avoid, the vices that a critic should avoid, from line 562, Pope goes on to say what qualities the critic should inculcate, the ideal character of the critic. Learn then what morals critics ought to show, for 'tis but half a judge's task to know. 'Tis not enough wit, art and learning join, in all you speak let truth and candour shine. So just knowledge is not enough for a judge. So wit, art and learning should join. So a critic should have intelligence, knowledge of his art as well as learning. In all you speak, let truth and candour shine, that not alone what to your judgment due, all may allow, but seek your friendship too. So, the critic should have truth and candour, there is honesty. And people should love not only their judgment, but also should seek their friendship. Be silent always when you doubt yourselves, and speak though sure with seeming diffidence. That is, a critic should not be too bold in his judgment, in his prescriptions, and should always offer his judgment with seeming diffidence, that is, in a hesitant manner, in a polite manner. And if he has any doubt, he should remain silent. Some positive persisting folks we know that if one's wrong will needs be always so. So some foolish critics, if they sometimes make a mistake, they would persist in that mistake because of their ego. They won't admit their mistakes. But you with pleasure own your errors past and make each day a critic on the last. But you, who is going to be a true critic, apostrophizing, Pope says that you who are going to be a true critic, you should acknowledge your past errors, and every day should be a critic of the previous day. that is, all past actions and pronouncements should be judged later. It is not enough your counsel still be true, blunt truths more mischief than nice falsehoods do. So just the fact that a critic upholds or exposes the mistakes of a poet is not enough, because blunt truth often does more mischief than nice falsehood. So always telling the truth is also not acceptable. Sometimes if telling the truth would harm the writer or the people, then one should refrain from doing that. Men must be taught as if you taught them not, and things unknown proposed as things forgot. So even though a critic is actually teaching poets how they should write, but they should do that in such a manner that they won't be perceived as teaching anything. And when a poet has forgotten to do something, then he should be gently reminded or suggested, as if the critic is making a proposal. In other words, a critic should not offend the ego of the writer. Without good breeding, truth is disapproved. That only makes superior sense beloved. So superior sense would be loved only if it is presented with good breeding. So notice that here the important qualities desired in a critic is sense, judgment, wit. So these are mostly qualities of reason, rational qualities, because in Pope's age reason was still considered more important than imagination. Therefore, the qualities which were desired and the terms which were used were taste, judgment, sense, wit, and so on. Good breeding is also another thing. So good breeding is very important, that a man or a critic should be able to conduct himself in a polite manner. Be negars of advice or no pretense, for the worst avarice is that of sense. Never be miserly with your advice, because that is the worst kind of avarice, when you are not using your sense or your judgment, and you are not lending others your judgment. With mean complacence never betray your trust, nor be so civil as to prove unjust. So a critic should not be complacent, nor should be too civil. Fear not the anger of the wise to raise, those best can bear reproof who merit praise. So you should not be afraid that by criticizing a good poet, the poet would be angry, because those who are really good, those who are meritorious, they can also tolerate criticism. They can bear reproof. It were well might critics still this freedom take, but abuse reddens at each word you speak. So here is an allusion to John Dennis once again. Pope suggests that all these qualities of a good critic are absent in John Dennis, and he refers to Dennis by using Appius. Dennis wrote a tragedy named Appius and Virginia. So everybody, any contemporary of Pope would recognize that here Pope is alluding to Dennis. Dennis reddens at each word because he does not have these qualities, and stares tremendous with a threatening eye, like some fierce tyrant in old tapestry. Fear most to tax an honorable fool, whose right it is uncensored to be dull. So Pope says that you should not be afraid of criticizing a great poet, because he can take criticism, but always be afraid of criticizing a dull poet or a foolish poet, because they have much greater egos and they cannot take criticism. So it is his right to be dull yet uncensored. He cannot be criticized. Such without wit are poets when they please, as without learning they can take degrees. Uh, so, poets, anybody can be a poet even though he is without wit, because they can take degrees without learning anything. So here is the criticism of poetasters, that is, those who want to be poets even though they do not have talents, and they would be extremely offended if their lack of talent is pointed out. Leave dangerous truths to unsuccessful satyrs, and flattery to fulsome dedicators, whom when they praise the world believes no more than when they promise to keep scribbling over. So do not say dangerous truths, leave that to unsuccessful satyrs. Satire means satire, so those people who are more prone to writing satire, let them write satire or even sometimes dangerous truth, but in general, in poetry, dangerous truth should be avoided, and flattery should also be avoided. And here Pope is alluding to the contemporary practice of having dedicators, that is, having the practice of dedicating one's work to important patrons or lords. And in those letters of dedication, a poet would flatter the patron. But nobody believes these words when they praise, because everybody can recognize it as flattery. It is best sometimes your censor to restrain and charitably let the dull be vain. So you should be cautious about where to criticize and where not to criticize. So if the target is a dull poet, then you better do not criticize, because it will be in vain. So you be charitable to the dull. Your silence there is better than your spite, for who can rail so long as they can write? So better be silent, because otherwise you will have to go on railing, go on quarreling with the dull poet, and you will not be able to write. Still humming on, their drowsy course they keep, and last so long like tops are last asleep. So dull poets are compared to tops, which once lashed, once thrown, they keep moving and humming, keeping their drowsy course until they are lashed asleep. So it is useless to enter into a quarrel or into a dispute with dull poets, because they will keep fighting. False steps but help them to renew the race, as after stumbling, jades will mend their pace. So, false step, if the dull poets make mistakes or take false steps, they won't stop. Just like jades or broken horses, broken down horses, after stumbling they will keep walking. What crowds of these impenitently bold, in sounds and jingling syllables grown old, still run on poets in a raging vein, even to the dregs and squeezing of the brain, strain out the last dull droppings of their sense, and rhyme with all the rage of impotence. So here Pope is referring to also to the imperfect critics, who are very bold and who have who would be writing in jingling syllables grown old, that is old meter, and trying to squeeze some sense out of the poetry of poets who cannot write well, but these critics would strain out the last dull droppings of their sense and rhyme with all the rage of importance. I suppose Pope is talking about poets who, not critics here, of poets who practice the old kind of rhyming poetry, and even though they their poetry does not have much sense, but they keep on rhyming. So these are not great talented poets, but these are vain poets. Such shameless bards we have, and yet it is true, there are as mad abundant critics too. So after talking about these vain poets, he talks about critics who are also mad and abundant. The book full blockhead ignorantly read, with loads of learned lumber in his head, with his own tongue still edifies his ears, and always listening to himself appears. So this kind of a critic is so full of self-love that he is the only audience of his own writing. And critics who are proud to be well read, who mention a lot of authors but actually have not read them. So this kind of people are not rare in any society, where we see them boasting of their learning, but Pope says that they are ignorantly read. So they have read perhaps, but they did not understand anything. So they are book full blockhead, and they edify only their own ears and only listen to himself. So nobody listens to them. All books he reads, and all he reads assails from Dryden's Fables down to Dupé's Tales. So the more he reads, he attacks all kinds of poetry. Whether a poet is a major poet like Dryden or a minor poet like Thomas D'Urfé. Thomas D'Urfé, the author in the reign of Charles II, wrote a sequel in 5 acts of The Rehearsal. With him, most authors steal their works or buy. God did not write his own dispensary. So, with such a critic, authors, they disclaim their works because of the vicious attack of such critics. Sir Samuel Gurth, satirist, wrote a play called Dispensary. Name a new play and he is the poet's friend, may showed his faults, but when would poets mend? No place so sacred from such pops is barred, nor is Paul's church more safe than Paul's churchyard. So such writers, such critics, they would appear to be knowing every play. So you tell them about a new play and they would say that yes, they know about it. And you would tell them, and he would also say that that the poet was his friend and that he pointed out the poet's mistakes, but poets never mend themselves, they never listen to mistakes. No place so sacred from such pops is barred. So such foolish critics, they are not barred from any place, whether it is St. Paul's Church or St. Paul's Churchyard. St. Paul's Churchyard was the headquarters of the booksellers before the Great Fire of London. Which means that these foolish critics, they invade everywhere, they talk about every poet, they appear to be knowing every poet personally. In other words, they are vain and ambitious and boastful. Alright, so I'll stop here. Do you have any questions?